Let's go to the hotline. We're joined by our buddy Tom Hart, ESPN SEC Network. What's up, man? How you been?
I've been great. How about you?
I'm good, man. I got a release this morning that A&M is going to be hosting College Gameday for that second Saturday of college football. I guess it's their first official one. Did they still call the Ireland game the 0 week, I guess? Is that what they call it?
Yeah, week 0. Well, probably at some point, week 0 is going to become week 1. I was just literally just looking at that schedule, that opening week. And listen, game day is huge, and that's great for A&M. But even what struck me before that is the fact that, and I guess you could have predicted this, that's going to be the ABC primetime game. Just a big opportunity for Mike Elko and his team to deliver a message. And we talked barely about Notre Dame last week. We're kind of going over the schedule. I had a little bit more time to look into it. I suppose the prognosticators say that, some are saying that's a top 10 team. I don't know. We'll see once we get there, right? I mean, that's a long ways away, but a huge opportunity nonetheless, regardless whether they're ranked in the top 5 or in the top 20, a big opportunity for A&M.
Tom, Billy was on the show just a little while ago, but last week, and he made a comment about somebody who talked to him, how certain programs are a top 10 program until they're not. And programs like A&M have to prove that they're a top 10 program, right? So like LSU, I have my questions about LSU. I have my questions about Notre Dame. But because of the body of work over the last 20 years, they get the benefit of the doubt, while A&M, who flirts with those ideas every year, has to do it on a consistent basis. Just your thoughts on that topic.
Oh, yeah, I think that's accurate. I think that's true. And I think when you have peaks and valleys, critics tend to remember the valleys, right? Especially if it came at a point where you were the pick of the week, right? Like that's the flavor of the week. Man, A&M's on fire. Look at what they're going to do. And then it doesn't happen. And I think people who jump on bandwagons, and this goes for prognosticators and top 25 voters, they jump on the bandwagon, they elevate a team, and then they don't perform within that next week or the next month, whatever that might be. They tend to remember that. Like that hurts more than the benefit of the rise to get there. But the flip side of that coin is, and I saw this in the Cotton Bowl with Missouri and Ohio State, if Missouri goes to the Cotton Bowl and they beat, I don't know, let's say Michigan State was having a great year, and they beat Michigan State, and Michigan State's ranked as a top 10 team, there's generally a collective yawn throughout the country. Like, oh, great, you won the Cotton Bowl. You finished in the top 10. Nice season, and they pat you on the head, and away you go. But when you take down a team like Ohio State, that delivers a message. The casual, we're all just so into it, right? That we think that everybody knows everybody's depth chart and everybody's schedule and what they've done and what they're poised to do. The casual fan doesn't get that. So a primetime game against Notre Dame, you knock them off, that carries a heck of a lot more weight than, a next level, a next tier team that doesn't have that same recognition.
I also think it matters when it happens, right? So if you beat Notre Dame to start the season, it might be different than beating Notre Dame in November for what it does to you in that initial reaction, right? Because if Notre Dame ends up being an 8-4 team, sure, people will take that against you, but that initial spike you get from beating them, I think that can last longer.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, and as Notre Dame plays throughout the season, right? If they are a top 5 team, which some are saying, and you knock them off, well, then they're sure to find better wins throughout the course of the year. That's more likely than them just falling apart and becoming a top 25 bubble team. So every time Notre Dame wins a game with the schedule that they play and with the attention that they get, then A&M can ride that wake even farther. And I think that's really important.
Talking to Tom Hart here on TexAgs Radio. So we're very early into breaking down teams because there's so much change. But you look at this Notre Dame thing, you think about not only the program, but Riley Leonard coming over. You think about Mike Denbrook taking over, the former LSU offensive coordinator. There's reasons for optimism beyond just being Notre Dame there.
Yeah, I think Riley Leonard is going to be a real hot button quarterback this year because he got a lot of great attention before the injury when he was at Duke. But the numbers, especially through the air, don't suggest, and I'm just being hypercritical here, there's nothing against the player, but don't suggest that he was worthy of all the praise that he got. They were the flavor of the month, right? They got a couple of good wins. in September. They had some nationally televised games. He was a great story because he's so athletic and a great runner, and his basketball background and, the wristband that he wears that his mom, told him he sucks. Like it's a fun college football story. But in the end, the numbers, especially through the air and the touchdowns that he's thrown relative to interceptions, like the numbers don't jump out at you. I don't know if you have them in front of you. And you go, wait a second, this is the guy everyone's getting excited about. So I think that's going to be key off-season talk is, are you in the Riley Leonard camp or you're not? And if you are, is it because of potential? Because it's certainly not based on simple production. And then you could also make an argument that if you are in that camp, it's because he was the flavor of the month for an entire month for a team and a program that hadn't really seen success since Steve Spurrier was their head coach. So I think all that plays into college football storylines, which how you and I make our living.
By the way, we talk about Notre Dame trying to get back to what we think of Notre Dame, but honestly, like outside of since 2016 when Brian Kelly won 4 games, they've won at least 10 games every year but one. The year that they didn't was when Marcus Freeman took over and they won 9 games. So they have been consistently in the mix. They just haven't been the elite of the elites.
Yeah, and I think they probably have dipped a little bit from the nation's consciousness because of their strength of schedule. And I don't mean simply that the games or wins weren't worthy, but Notre Dame used to be must-see TV, right? And that was based upon who they were playing, when they were playing them. And now in this kind of cluttered college football television landscape, they're playing, an ACC team. If it's not Clemson, they've kind of fallen out of favor in terms of like, where does your remote go, right? Where does your remote go on a Saturday afternoon or a Saturday night? They had their series with Georgia. Those are 2 of the most watched games in the last probably 8 years of college football. They were huge, monster games. But the other ones, especially with Clemson not playing well lately and Florida State being, even though they came back last year, kind of being what they've been, USC, just hasn't been must-see television, and I think that probably hurts their brand a little bit.
So I'm looking at Riley Leonard's stats here. Overall, he's a quarterback rating of 131, thrown for 4,450 yards. He's got 24 touchdowns to 10 interceptions. Solid numbers, but not like ridiculous numbers.
Yeah, what was he last? Can you break it down just last season before the injury?
Yep, 7 games, 95 of 165, 57% passer. He threw for 3 touchdowns and 3 picks, a 116 quarterback rating.
Yeah, so obviously it's unfair to hold all of that against him, but to be a top portal target and you threw for 3 touchdowns last year, that I think people are going to look at that critically and say, okay, what did they really get? And can he take his game to the next level? Can he have a bounce back season?
Tom, if I remember correctly, you're on the call this weekend, right, for Arkansas A&M?
Yeah, that's right.
So are you at the concern level of A&M? Like, obviously, you look at every SEC team, but if you're an A&M fan, should you be concerned for what you've seen the last couple weekends?
Well, I think Schloss put it pretty well during or right after that LSU series, where he said, listen, if we're not going to play perfectly, and they had 5 errors in the first 2 games of that series, then our offense has to be good enough to cover up for the mistakes. And it wasn't in the LSU series, and it certainly wasn't last week either. And I think there is I've never been a sky is falling Chicken Little, but I think it's fair to say, ooh, hold on a second. Braden Montgomery's in a real slump. Like, the bottom of the order did not necessarily do its job, and neither did some of our stars last week. The strength of this team is, and we've discussed this before, it's not just hitting the ball out of the ballpark, it's getting on base. And getting on base and setting the table for guys who can do that. And I was just going over the numbers from, each of the last 2 weekends. And yeah, I mean, that's cause for concern. It doesn't mean that can't be found again. Now, it's going to be tough against Hagen Smith, who is the best pitcher in the SEC this year, easily. It's going to be tough to find your rhythm against him, but you better have an opportunity against the Arkansas bullpen. I could see if A&M doesn't find the offense this weekend, and I know this weather's going to play a role in all of this, and some thunderstorms likely. they're likely to be low-scoring games on both sides because Arkansas's offense, just especially on the road, has been very pedestrian. So then the question becomes, okay, can you play clean enough? Don't issue free passes. Don't make mistakes in the field. Can you play clean enough to win a close game, a 1-2 run game, and have the other team make those mistakes? And those will be great tests for A&M going forward and going into the postseason.
I think interestingly, the big question marks for A&M has been pitching overall, right? In this past weekend, starting pitching was great. Prager was fantastic. Shane Sadeo was fantastic. Yeah, there were some issues with Justin Lampkin, but if they get that kind of starting pitching, to me, the offense eventually is going to get back to being what the offense has been throughout the entire season.
I agree with you. And it comes down to, what kind of cushion are you getting on both sides? It sure is easier to pitch and to dominate and to pitch with confidence when you're going out there with a 3-run lead. Now, once again, this Arkansas team is not I'm just looking at the Ole Miss stats right here for A&M last weekend. This Arkansas team is not the kind that has shown that over the course of the season that they're going to bang the ball out of the yard and be a threat 1 through 9. They have some guys that can do it. I didn't notice, by the way, that Prager struck out 10 and only walked 1 this weekend. Like, those are really good numbers. But you put a lot of pressure on your pitching staff if, Lavalette 2 for 10 and Montgomery is 2 for 11 and Grahovac is 2 for 13. That is where the threat of this offense begins at the top of the order. Camarillo had that incredible game against LSU and a really good series, and it comes back down to earth and goes 0 for 11. So, yeah, that's got to be straightened out first, and I think the pitching's kind of the icing on the cake.
Hey, I saw a tweet of yours that caught my attention. I don't know if you can share a little bit of the background on the Declan Sullivan family and how Tim Corbin has impacted their lives and they've impacted his life.
Yeah, so just put in perspective where Vanderbilt baseball is right now. They've made 17 consecutive NCAA tournaments. He's won 2 national titles. He may be the most competitive coach I've ever met in my life. I mean, this guy has had series where they kick a game away on game 3 and they're getting ready to get on the charter and the team hits the showers and changes into clothes. And he's so mad, he flies all the way back to Nashville in his uniform. I mean, he wins and losses mean everything to this man. That being said, they go into the finale against Tennessee. Their NCAA streak is on the line. They're a bubble team if they get swept by Tennessee. Tennessee's number 1 in the country. They're their rivals. There's the Tony Vitello kind of aura of that team. And he's up late at night the night before, not thinking about how can we scratch across some runs, how can we shut out Tennessee, but thinking about this family whose 8-year-old, after some storms in the Nashville area, was swept into a stormage drain, stuck all the way underneath the neighborhood for 200 yards in a culvert before being spit out. They find his body. They get his heart going again. He goes to the hospital. And the family was familiar to the Corbins because both the boys, the 8-year-old and the 10-year-old, had both spent time at Vanderbilt baseball camp. So he calls the dad, Sunday morning, and he says, I know I can't do anything for you guys in the hospital with the one son, but can we bring the other one over to the ballpark today? And another element to Tim Corbin, like during opponent's batting practice, Vandy finishes hitting. He goes straight to the bench. He's got his clipboard. He watches the other team. He scouts them. He sees who's doing what, who's moving the ball where. On this day, he and his wife, Maggie, as soon as Vandy batting practice is over, they leave the ballpark. They go get in his little golf cart. They go over to Vandy Medical Center. They pick up the son. They bring him back to the ballpark. And before the game, he's by Corbin's side. It's the biggest game of the year for him. And all he wants to do is win. But in this moment, in this family at need, he reaches out and says, it's a small gesture on my behalf, but let me help the family out a little bit. And I just think it speaks to the things that a lot of these people do behind the scenes that we never hear about and we don't know about. And we criticize coaches all the time and players all the time, but how are you using your bullpen? What are you doing batting that guy third? That was the last thing on his mind. Even though he wanted to win, he thought of his family first. And that really tugged at my heartstrings. And I know based on the reaction I've gotten nationally on that story, rightly so, a lot of people really love that about him.
Yeah, Tom, wonderful story, and just thank you for sharing that. I want to ask you a couple more college football questions before I let you go. We had a topic earlier in the show. Is there a position group in college football, in your opinion, and this may take some thinking here, I should have probably texted you beforehand, that you can lack being elite and win, okay? So, for instance, I think, especially for A&M, you need an elite offensive line. Do you need an elite wide receiver core in today's college football to win? Do you need it to be a playoff level team? Do you need an elite quarterback, or can you get away with a pretty good quarterback? Is there a position group in your mind that you can maybe not have elite and still be pretty successful, like college football playoff conversation successful?
I thought Michigan's quarterback play last year was average. In the Penn State game, I think they ran the ball 31 straight times or something like that. That is the coaching staff believing in every other aspect of their offense and saying, don't worry, we don't care, JJ, where you go in the draft. We're just going to have you turn and hand the ball off because we know we can control this game. And that's a real anomaly, though. I mean, I think if you go back and look at national champions or college football playoff contenders, you've got to have an elite quarterback. So maybe that was an exception to the rule. And I think if there's any position group defensively that you can get away with not having, you better be elite at those other two levels, right? If you don't have an elite defensive line, then your corners better be able to lock guys down and lock them down for long periods. That's a lot to ask. And the flip side is true. I think the easiest way to answer that question, and I'm trying to think of examples, is you could be average at the running back position if you have elite receivers, or vice versa, right? Because the quarterback can make up the difference there. But man, in this day and age, if you want to win a national title, you got to be good across the board.
Well, I'm just looking at the last few Heisman winners, just for conversation's sake. Jaden Daniels, they were good. LSU was good. They weren't elite. Caleb Williams, they were good. They weren't elite.
Yeah, just real quick, like as we go one by one, LSU's defense was horrific last year. So, and that was the defense as a whole. So that's a pretty good example to have the season that Jaden did and where they were offensively, and completely balance out, if not undercut, by the inability to stop the ball on the other side.
And you can say the same thing about Caleb Williams and USC a couple years prior, right? Like, or
100%.
even last year.
Yeah, and I don't. The USC criticism is real because Lincoln Riley's defense over the years has been. It felt like it was overlooked by the coaching staff and overlooked on signing day. LSU didn't mean to be bad. They had a bunch of guys injured, and there were some extenuating circumstances in that scenario. But the USC thing really jumped out because it was just like they felt like defense didn't matter. Well, no, you got to be able to stop people.
Tom, great stuff, man. Thanks for the time.
All right. Thanks, man. I look forward to seeing that red carpet. Dalton's supposed to be spreading some roses for me. He said he quit his job to join the traveling circus and roll out red carpet for visiting dignitaries.
I'm sorry, who? Dalton? Who?
Oh, you wouldn't know. Just this guy.
I miss him already, Tom. Talk to you later, man.
See you, boys.
See you.